Okay, so we're going to get started. 2 days, we're coming down the closing stretch. And I think one of the challenges now is, how do we make sense of all that's being discussed up here, out in the halls? Lots of interesting things going on, but I think all of us are challenged to say, are we looking at, is this a new normal? I think most would say probably not. It's momentum that's building, there's interesting things going on, but we're scratching the surface. There's the challenge of what are we doing? There's a question of who is in the room versus who's not in the room. Are we engaging the right actors across the finance industry, across corporates in terms of the actors who require and need to deploy new sustainable forms of finance. So we're going to try to make some sense of this through this discussion, through the perspective of a cross-sector of the finance community and of our membership. We have 2 commercial banks on our group, with the Société Générale, which is Richard Sanderji, which is Group Chief Regional Officer of SocGen for the Middle East. Denise Hill, who is the head of sustainability at Itaú, Banco Itaú, and she's also the co-chair of the UNEP-FI of our Global Steering Committee. We also have a development bank, which is Per Steen, who's the lead on climate finance. And we have a reinsurer, so a representative of the insurance industry, Bernd Kohn, who's the chief executive for Middle East and Africa. We also have, for a regional perspective, Najib Saab, who's the Secretary General of the Arab Forum for Environment and Development in Lebanon. So we have a cross-section of the industry, all who are grappling as institutions and as markets with some of the issues that we've been discussing in the last 2 days. And the overall, what is this, how relevant is this to my organization? Is it something that it has to be off in one office with one team, with one new policy guideline? Or is it something that really cross-cuts our organizations? Is it something about risks? What should we not be doing? Or is it something about risk and opportunity? And as we've heard in various places, actually taking risks to create opportunity. How is it that we essentially put in place the types of innovations and the mindset, the culture, the leadership that's required in our organizations to move through this sustainable, this transition towards a more sustainable economy and more sustainable institutions? What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the panel and challenge them. First of all, I'm going to ask them to talk about what are you doing today that you believe is leading practice within your organizations, and a little bit about why does that influence change? What is it about it? Is it one product and one good transaction, or is there something bigger at play here within your organizations? So with that, could I start with Richard Sanderji? Can you say, from the perspective of Société Générale, SocGen, one of the big French players, also one of the first movers into this concept of positive impact, how do we generate new value creation from delivering and working with this new development agenda? Could you talk a little bit of where you see, or what you're doing today that you think is leading?
Yes, and as you mentioned, Société Générale as a group is one of the driving forces in the Positive Impact initiative, and we're very happy to be there. Before I answer your question directly, I just wanted to make a couple of comments to take stock of what I've heard today, and also part of our experience in the region. My first comment is that I think it was a very good idea to have this forum here in the UAE, because what we see is that the UAE is really leading the pack in this region in terms of sustainable goals and social impact. And we have seen that directly, especially when it comes to the energy transition, where the agenda has been very active and the delivery has been very good when it comes to renewable energy, for instance. I was unfortunately not here yesterday, but I know there was a session on Islamic finance. I think that's another reason why it was a good idea to be here, because with Dubai's ambition to become the global hub for Islamic finance, I am personally a great believer in the links that you can make between the Islamic finance world and positive impact finance, you know, just for one very basic reason, which is that Islam is all about social consciousness, and the way and the philosophy behind these two are very close. My second set of comments was really about what I heard about banks today. I think it would be very simplistic to believe that it's all a question about banks just accepting to finance those projects. At some point, I think we were on the fringe of a bit of bank bashing, which I'm not sure is really the right way to go. For instance, I think I heard someone saying the best way to start is to have one bank doing it, give them an award, and have them fly to the UN to shake hands. That's hopefully a joke, because it would be a very poor idea of the leadership of large banks like ourselves. The leadership of our banks are very much busy these days trying to make sure the regulators of the banking system does not do the wrong things and does not sort of impact too much the sustainability of the banking model. In that sense, coming back to the leadership, we have a leadership that is very committed, but I don't think we can ask the leadership to implement. So one of the keys for us banks and for us at Société Générale is really to have ownership and empowerment given to specific teams at the right level of the organization, so that they can serve as catalysts for this agenda. And this is precisely you know, what we're doing at Société Générale. And my last general comment is that well, there are two ways to look at things from the banking perspective. Obviously, there is an opportunity to create new business, a new profitable business, as again, regulation today is all about profitability or the impact of regulation. But I think a very large part of what we're talking about positive impact is also requires a value chain, a new value chain to be created. And in that sense, I think we banks need also to work more with some of the change agents that we can have in this value chain. And especially I'm thinking about civil society, which is not necessarily a concept that we within the banking system have embraced. But I think we need to learn to work more with civil society, and even, you know, being part of that agenda of taking on public objectives within private groups.
So Richard, 30 seconds, positive impact bond. What has been the experience? You're on your second issuance now. What have you learned from the first to the second, and how does it relate to these things like the new value chain you speak of?
Yeah, so you're talking about green bonds here. So
the SocGen, your what do you call the positive impact bond?
You said second issue, right? So
yep.
Yeah. So I mean, we have issued indeed. I mean, for us there are three main areas. The first one is really developing products with positive impact, and green bonds is very much part of it. We have done our second issue of 500 million recently. So we have a total of $1 billion of bonds, and the proceeds of which are invested into our renewable energy activities. We are developing also investment products, especially for our retail client base, so that they can choose to invest into positive impact products. We have developed in this region, in Africa in particular, mobile banking with the objective of social inclusion. So these are all specific programs that have been developed in terms of new products. But we want to go well beyond that, and the second element is really for us to play a bigger role in bridging this gap of 5 to 7 trillion. And that's where this new value chains come into place, whether it's in areas like healthcare, smart city, and others. And we have a few initiatives ongoing at the moment on this. And our third angle is really about implementing as soon as possible our commitments that were made in the Paris agreement. And I can mention that perhaps later, but we have taken very specific, we have made very specific commitments which we are implementing as we speak.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Richard. Let's move to Brazil. Banco Intel, you're one of the largest banking institutions in Latin America. You've been with the UNEP-FI for a long time,
yes,
including in its leadership. How do you see what's going on in your Brazilian markets and in the regional market today, what you're doing today that's exciting?
Tough times, but at the same time interesting times, because we are now dealing in Brazil with a very difficult political and economics momentum. But at the same time, if you're talking about sustainability aspects and ISG and banks and the environmental in general for this field, we have, like in the last 3 years, we launched a self-commitment many years ago that generates, with a multi-stakeholder engagement and consultation, a regulation that raised the minimum bar in Brazil for ISG aspects in risk, governance, policy. And now we have like a regulation coming from central bank, it launched in the last year, that raising the minimum bar of the investments that we have in economy that are now going from 9% in the last year, using the concepts of green economy that UNEP-FI use, moving to 20% of the total credit loans that we have in Brazil from green sectors. And it represents 80% of the total amount of credit that we have in Brazil, and it is a lot for 1 year. It's not a movement that happened in the last year. I think it's being built in the last 3, 4, 5 years. I think almost more than that. But the thing is, it's not a difficult way for us, not about regulation, because most part of the bank were been working on it. They perceive risk, they can be conscious about the risk, they understand a little bit more environmental and risk management as we did in the last years, is conscious, is like, okay, everybody's paying attention on that. The difficulty is in the side of the opportunity. I have no many things to do when the regulation comes, but difference in the market, when we had this kind of process that generates regulation, is the raising of minimum bar. For everyone, it's like, okay, it's a new standard. It's a very good signal for the financial sector, for the banks, to the market. It's like, okay, now as a banking, if you want to have access to capital in general, you have to follow minimum things in terms of social and environmental aspects, including in governance. It's a very good signal, including to engage in companies in like, okay, it's not different than that. It's basics. It's not about results and social and environmental. It's about minimum frame and results above that. It's generated discussion of impact, including Brazil. We have like many other examples that things that are becoming normal or discussing, like green bonds. We launched, in Brazil we had 2 green bonds. One we participate as a part, other launched by Santander. In the same period that we lost the investment grade, and it works a lot. It's an opportunity because imagine a field when you have to finance yourself, your company, and you have an opportunity to launch something green to attract investment that you cannot attract in a normal way. It's a very good example. Last week we launched in partnership with FEBRABAN and World Business Council local group, a guide made by 2 groups, FEBRABAN, all the banks, it's a federal association of the banks, and World Business Council for Sustainable Development, made by how companies could access this kind of finance and how could bank improve their approach in their areas to generate more opportunities to finance. Because green in Brazil, it's more related with the nicest part of the balance sheet of the companies. In many ways, we are looking only through the risk part, not to the opportunity. Refinance Forest, one of the green bonds, it's about it. It's a company that is specialized in forest, which is green as general. All bonds of this company could be green. You have the discussion about what the next level, it will be important. I think we have, like, in general, leadership are convinced that it's not a matter of why. You have some matters about how. We've been developing many tools with local university and partnership with UNEP-FI, Positive Impact, analyzing frameworks, how to measure the real impact and the real risk. But I think we have a very special moment to take off the opportunity of the green development as a new way to think about the next stage for Brazil and including for Latin America.
Great. Okay, thank you, Denise. Let's come into the region, and Najib, in AFED, in the case of Lebanon and the region more broadly, where do you see things are today in terms of the pluses and maybe some of the challenges in terms of the minuses on this agenda?
Yeah, actually my organization, AFED, our main input is an annual report on the state of Arab environment. And this report is now published for the 9th year. It gives overview of what's going on with recommendations. The organization membership, we have private sector, the biggest companies in the region are members, universities, media organizations, and governments are observers, so it is the opposite way. But they deal with us with ownership. They feel they are part of it. Now, what we have noticed over the years is the following. Two of our main reports, which we have produced, one was on ecological footprint in Arab countries. We have produced an atlas of ecological footprint. For the first time, people were shocked to see some things. For example, you say, okay, we want expatriates. Why Canada and New Zealand can have expatriates and not us? We showed that Canada and New Zealand, to do sustainable development for their resources, they need more people. While you cannot have sustainable development with 93% expatriates, in the long run, maybe in the short run it's okay, where you don't have enough air and food and water for all of those people. The ecological footprint report was shocking a little bit for some countries, but then it was followed by a very important report on green economy in a changing Arab world. At that time, some considered talking about green economy a conspiracy. They told us, you are trying to bring in commitments on climate change from the window, and we didn't accept them from the door. I can report something good about this, which you notice, that many countries in the region, led by UAE, have their green economy strategies. What is important, what we find, that our report inspired some changes, and something I can report, when we talked in our sustainable energy report about phasing out subsidies, we said, awareness is not enough. It should be, Arabs are not different species than Europeans. People in other countries, they follow the rule because there is a rule. It touches their pocket. You tell people, don't do this, don't do that. If it doesn't touch your pocket, it won't. So as long as you have subsidies for mainly water and energy and electricity, people will overspend. So when we called for phasing out subsidies, one of our board members resigned. He said, this is against oil. This was 3 years ago. Now his country is in the forefront, not of phasing out subsidies, of eliminating subsidies. What is bad, we were calling for soft landing. When we said soft landing, UAE accepted our concept of soft landing to diversify the economy. Some countries considered it interference in their internal affairs. Now, bad enough they are having crash landing. They had to eliminate subsidies very fast, but it is on the right track. Now, of the yesterday and today discussions, I saw more opportunities than risks. I thought that the risk is to ignore the changes and not to take advantage of the opportunities available there. The mindset of governments and of people changed after the Paris Agreement, after the SDGs were adopted. So now the risk is not to go ahead to grab the opportunities. It is much bigger risk to just continue in the traditional way.
Great. Okay, so to some extent, we're getting beyond the conspiracy phase. We're getting real awareness raising. We're starting to get an understanding. We're starting to get things like plans and roadmaps on the public sector side. And I think we've heard the last couple of days the need for that, and also in terms of the capacities from a framework setting perspective, regulators, policymakers, and on the side of industry. Let me move to Peer Stein, because Peer, you're the only one on the panel who has a development as the core objective of your organization. And huge expectations on the development finance community, and particularly on IFC, because you're sort of in the limelight of leading forward, bringing the private sector into new markets and new aspects of development. Peer, have you cracked the nut in the sense of how you bring together public and private in terms of both the instruments that you're deploying and also in terms of the other things that need to be done to make sustainable finance happen?
Sure. Sure, not that we have cracked the net, but three quick points. And I want to go back to your original question about risk opportunity and where we stand on this and how we bring our developmental role into this. So the first one is that we asked our clients, right? We work with over 750 financial intermediaries in over 100 emerging markets. And the lending institutions have about $5.4 trillion in assets in those countries, accounting for about a quarter of total banking sector assets if you exclude the BRICS countries. So pretty good, solid client base to start off with. So when we ask them, now, are you currently active in climate finance? So we narrowed it down to that aspect. Over 2/3 came back to us and said, yes, we are, right? And that's not from a starting point of a risk management point of view, but from an opportunity point of view, right? Over 50% of them are active in renewable energy finance, energy efficiency finance, and then you have a long list of water waste management, green buildings, climate smart agriculture, and so on. So I think our clients clearly see this as an opportunity, right? Now, where do we come into play and how do we help them? So when we then asked further, what do you need in terms of financing, in terms of technical assistance and support, there's a clear need that a lot more needs to be done. And if we compare it or benchmark ourselves to Brazil, now clearly the banking sector in Brazil is quite advanced when it comes to seizing that opportunity, right? When you heard the percentages of how much financing is being done already by the banks in Brazil, that's clearly above what the average is, what we've seen in our market. So there's clearly development. So first point, clearly an opportunity. Our banks that we work with and our financial institutions want to seize this, but no, there's a need for support, and I think this network here obviously is one of the leading networks as well to drive this forward. The second point is that we've talked about the regulatory side and policies, right? I think one of the most important developments after the Paris Agreement was that the G20 took that on its agenda to drive this forward, and that it took it on the agenda not in the leader stream or the which is sometimes a little bit fluffy, but in the core stream of governors and ministers of finance, right? And I think that was a real change in terms of the dialogue that one had, and I think that for the first time also the dynamic in that group was very interesting because the emerging markets were far more advanced on regulatory measures than the developed countries about taking on the policy challenges that relate to sustainable finance, right? Whether that is Brazil, or whether that is China, whether that's Indonesia. And so that, I think, is a dynamic that we find, very promising, right? When the Sustainable Banking Network was founded in 2012 with 10 countries, Brazil, China, Vietnam, and a number of other countries, we thought this was far, far out, right? Today, that network has 27 countries in there. 12 countries have since then passed regulations or industry standards for sustainable finance, and it's rapidly increasing, right? And this is a dynamic that is happening not in the developed markets. It's a dynamic that is happening in emerging markets and far more rapidly than we can perceive. And I think there's a reverse learning opportunity here for developed markets. And the third point that I want to pick up on, where I see an opportunity and also an opportunity for public intervention, is green bonds, right? We heard this mentioned, SocGen with its issuance, Denise on the side of what is happening in Brazil with the green bond market now developing. We believe there's a huge opportunity to really crowd in capital markets and institutional investors. And we believe that leveraging financial institutions here is particularly important, because we heard in different panels, right, that most of the emerging markets, at least, are very much dominated by the banking sector, right? So it's often then the banks that are primary issuers of bonds as well. So how can we get banks to issue green bonds? Because they are likely to be the repeat issuers of green bonds, and they need the long tenors to make renewable energy investments viable. So what can we do to drive that dynamic? Because so far, it's really only 3 emerging markets that have issued, where banks have issued green bonds, right? Mm-hmm. It's China number 1, India number 2, Turkey number 3. I guess Brazil will be number 4, or Morocco. But that's a dynamic where we'll try to put together both a more concerted effort from the World Bank, IFC, and GCF type to drive the agenda really to develop these markets.
I mean, green bonds is it's a fascinating example of actually where development finance, a product, was the World Bank Group, and I think the EIB were the initial issuers to finance essentially their development agenda. Today has become a fully commercial product towards an asset class. What is IFC doing? Are you doing the same things on green bonds that you were doing 3 years ago? Or what's different in terms of your engagement on this right. product today?
So we continue to be engaged as an issuer and also as part of the executive committee of the Green Bond Principles to drive that part. But we've since shifted towards working with our clients to issue green bonds, with countries to help them develop green bond guides. And we are currently in the process of putting together a $2 billion fund that will focus on 20 countries to help financial institutions originate green bonds, coupled with a technical assistance package to overcome the initial incremental additional cost of issuing a green bond. Once you've done this, repeat green bond issuance is rather automatic, and that would hopefully be announceable by the end of this calendar year and then to be launched next year.
Okay, great. Pierre, thank you very much. Now, the big player in the room, often the quiet one behind the scenes and one of the most fundamentally important, and one of the actors who actually often in terms of climate has the most knowledge in terms of understanding long-term risks, what impacts climate are going to have on portfolios, and the knowledge and the potential to actually work with various stakeholders, including governments, to better understand how to manage and mitigate such risks. The reinsurance industry. Bernd, could you speak from the Munich Re perspective? You guys have been around for a long time in this issue, one of the leaders in terms of understanding and providing a lot of the information that both as an organization but also globally that's been used in terms of feeding into things like the climate processes. Where are you today on this transition towards understanding what essentially will this be a new opportunity for Munich Re going forward?
Yeah, definitely. Being a reinsurer, actually, the concept of sustainability is very deeply entrenched in our DNA. We've been around for 140 years now, and we've learned that acting in a sustainable way and taking a longer-term perspective on risk actually has a positive economic impact. And we try to share what we've learned during that journey with all kinds of stakeholders. As you said, governments, our private clients, but also with our shareholders. And let me share a few examples with you. Why is that so deeply entrenched in our DNA? I mean, first of all, we carry risks. So we do not trade risks. We carry the risks that we assume on our balance sheet, and for sometimes a very, very long time, up to 30, 40 years. And if you deal with, for example, natural catastrophes like typhoons, flash floods, you look at return periods of sometimes 100 years, 50 years, 200 years, and you have to build that into your calculation of the insurance premium. And obviously, in that context, one of our biggest concerns is the risk of change, and in that respect, climate change. So we have to build in the effects of climate change into our windstorm models, into our flash flood models that we have, into our drought models when we advise on the agricultural side. And actually, I'm proud to say that the first time Munich Re mentioned the effects of climate change was in a publication in 1974. And already then we had a price loading in some of our models for this risk of climate change. And we're obviously advising governments, sometimes together with the NGOs, on, especially in natural catastrophe prone countries, to help them being more resilient. So starting from what are the best building codes, where to settle, where not to settle. A lot of the world population lives close to the shores, as you know, or the riverbanks, which is, from an insurance perspective, not the best location to settle. We advise them on food sustainable programs, so we have some of the drought insurance programs together with the World Banks and others in place. But also in the private sector, we've learned that, for example, buildings that have been erected with the concept of sustainability used to be the better risks also for us as their insurers. So you see a lower number of accidents happening during the erection phase. You don't see them collapsing. You don't see them burning. So it's really the deep knowledge of what we underwrite, and we have our engineers in the field being active in the risk management concepts. Mm-hmm. And we basically put an economic price on the bad risks versus a bonus on the good risks. And that is also, I mean, that spans all the way to life insurance and health insurance. So you can also apply the same system of treating your own body in a sustainable way. Gives you a financial advantage in buying health insurance. And this is also something that we share with many governments. We also in this region very active on the health side, on the health sector side, all the way to life insurance products for HIV positive people in South Africa and other countries. So that is deeply entrenched in what we do. And obviously, we enjoy having a chairman that is very passionate about these things and was a very early adopter of the principles of sustainable insurance, sustainable investments, and we have dedicated ESG committees where all the risks that are on the borderline of being compliant are discussed, yeah, be it a dam or what have you. And it's of course a trade-off sometimes. Yeah, so you have to balance short-term commercial interests versus long-term resilience. But our shareholders, in the meantime, very much like this concept, and I think they have been rewarded over time.
Okay, great, Bernd. That's a nice ending. There is value getting things right. Now I'm going to just put one more question, very briefly ask you. So, you know, great things are going on today. You know, you're in many ways leaders in this field. Are we going to sit still? Let's go forward 3 years or 5 years. Could you tell me what you hope will be different within your organizations 5 years from now on this agenda? Is it more of the same, or do you see some fundamental things that your organization you think needs to do to get things to the next level? Could I put that to Richard first?
Sure. Very difficult question. Actually, I will have an easy way out because we are in a blackout period, so I can't give any forward-looking statements. What I can say at minimum, that I can say because it has been officially announced, is that by 2020, we have committed to scale down our coal-fired power portfolio to 19% of the total power portfolio. And we've also committed to scale down our coal mining portfolio by 14%. And in the meantime, that implies that as of the 1st of January 2017, we have a ban on any new asset, any new financing in these two sectors. So that's, I would say, the minimum that I am hoping for. Beyond that, and again, without giving any figures, you know, my hope is that since we have really pushed that agenda since, I would say, 2012, so over the past 4 years, I hope that within the next 3 years, in terms of the proportion of positive impact assets in our books, I hope we will do much better and much more than what we've done in the past 4 years.
Great. Okay, thanks. Thanks, Richard. Denise, 3
Wow.
5 years, what's going to be different?
I think the future is something that we are deciding now. I used this phrase because it's important to see what we're going to see in the 5 years is similar than what we are deciding now. Based on that, I'd like to see the results of like not a portfolio not a product ISG approach, but a government that promotes ISG. It's not more necessarily in 5 years. It's like a normal business. Why don't we are doing business that we believe, that we are convinced that are profitable? My CEO used to say that sustainability is about best practice in governance. It's about to do the right thing. I'd like to say that I imagine in 5 years, not discussing things like that, but discussing new models, new ways to approach the market in terms of market share, in terms of whatever, normal businesses discussion without remember sustainability or SRI or whatever. I heard about some very nice thoughts that I bring with me at home. Fiduciary duty for investors. Why not banks? We have shareholders, stakeholders. Why? It's not my money. It's money of someone that are getting investing in things that I have to think about it. I think we're going to be improved in many people in the organization. It's like quite new, but you have like CFO signing the committed with integrated report. It's quite new because it's about management. It's not about the report. It changed things like that. In 5 years, I imagine this kind of discussion here, not as a paradigm, it's a normal set, as the standards. And I think we really should work together. In moments like that, I know that it can be done. Because I remember China, I remember being here for a long time, and things are changing. And after Paris, there's no more why. It's a little bit about how and when, but it's not more matters about why. I think for me, it's a little bit easy because we have like sustainability in the vision, and as committed CEO, we are in a very nice moment for this discussion in Brazil. But my suggestion is how could we share more information and try, don't reinvent the wheels, to come faster, to go faster, and to really set a new parameter of development and businesses. Why don't we? That's my imagination and my action today to generate this kind of future that we want.
Excellent. Thank you, Denise. Butch Buchani, who heads the PSI, Principal Sustainable Insurance, within the FI Secretariat, he likes to give examples of leadership. And one of the ones he talks about is he challenges people to say, you go to any Munich Re office in the world and you ask them about ESG, and they'll all talk about the same implementation. It's within the organization. You have a framework, you've integrated it. It's absolutely internalized and understood. With that basis, Bernd, do you think 5 years from now you don't need to change? You've hit the new normal within your organization? Or what sort of change would you look for now, going forward?
I mean, obviously, I hope that our portfolio of investments and also risks that we have in a sustainable space, like solar, wind, but also microinsurance, life, health, is ever increasing. And what I see at the moment is really disruptive from actually technological point of view. So technology really helps us to dramatically increase the scope and scale of our products. So if you look at across Africa, how mobile technology gives, for example, farmers access to microinsurance products to protect their seeds from the next drought, or to savings products, and all that contributes definitely to sustainability. So technology will help to reduce that trade-off between short-term profits and mid-term or longer-term sustainable investments. The other thing that I see at the moment, and that really gives me a lot of hope, is the young people that we recruit. Almost every job interview, the really good graduates ask us about our ESG standards and what they can do, and they really become very passionate about the things that we can tell them, so that we have already started that journey. And also whenever we have a new project, I see the hands of the young ones going up. I want to be on that project. I want to contribute to that. Because also, I mean, if you're in financial service today, you're normally the ugly child in every party standing in the corner, yeah, at least for insurers. I don't know about the bankers. But, and that is changing now. And now you can really start telling some fascinating stories on how you contribute to that development. And that, I think, is fantastic.
Great, great. Thank you, Bert. I'm going to come to you, Pierre. You know, a number of years ago, maybe 10 years ago, there was kind of a theory that the markets could do it all, and actually we don't really need development banking any longer. You know, they can get it themselves. Now we've come very quickly back, particularly on climate but other issues, is that the role of development banking in public finance as a risk taker, as a partner, as a cost and risk and capital share is very critical. What do you see the trajectory of that discussion going forward on issues like climate? Is the demands on the IFCs of the world going to go up, or will you be able to exit industries as you see, you know, mission accomplished? Will you be able to say that?
So we are fortunate to have a published plan for 2020 for the World Bank Group on climate action and for IFC. So the trajectory is clearly going up. So the commitment that we've made is that 28% of total commitments in 2020 will be climate related, and we'll mobilize another $13 billion per annum in private sector investments at that time. Now, what does that mean for our work through financial institutions? And again, you know, there are three main points here. The first one is it means that we have to quadruple what we're doing through financial intermediaries in climate finance in 4 years. But we are quite optimistic that we can do that given the demand that we see from our clients. So it's less us peddling something, but it's a real demand that we see from our clients, and then it's more a question, do we have the right products? Do we now provide the right solutions? The second is that we are in a process of mainstreaming climate through all of our products in the work that we do with financial intermediaries. So when we provide MSME or micro, small, and medium-sized enterprise financing solutions, now that we have a component that is green finance. When we provide housing finance solutions, that it's green building solutions that we provide. When we talk about insurance, that we incorporate, how do we green investment portfolios as well. So the mainstreaming part is a very important part because that's where the business opportunity lies as well, right? I mean, many of you may be familiar with a study that was done in the US on green building, on mortgages to houses that have an Energy Star rating compared to those that don't have an Energy Star rating. They looked at 71,000 loans, and the mortgages made to houses with an Energy Star rating had a 35% lower default rate and an over 20% lower prepayment rate. Now that goes to the core of the business model, and that obviously then speaks also to why that mainstreaming is so important. And the third and the last point is that we do need, and that goes back to the regulatory action, I do believe that there's a policy action here as well. And so we made a commitment to the G20 co-chairs that we would build the sustainable banking network to 50 members with 25 countries having implemented standards or policies related to sustainable finance in those countries.
Great. Okay, thanks. Thanks, Peter. So let me come to Najib. Najib, we've gotten beyond conspiracy theories. We have lots of expectation today in the region. 5 years from now, job done? What's going to be different, do you think?
And 5 years from now, what we hope in my organization to help more to enact policies in the region, to put ideas into action. And I give one example to make it concrete. One of the biggest logistics companies in the world based in the Gulf, it is from the Gulf region. In Europe, they have 50 million euros budget per year for CSR. In the region here, by their laws, they are not allowed to spend anything. Why? Because in Europe, by laws, they have to. So when I say we want to enact policies, to help enact policies. Number two, what we would like to have in those coming 5 years in my organization, when we produced our report on green economy, we had 13 sectors, and we mentioned what has to be done and what is the return. This was 5 years ago. Now we have a stronger business case after Paris and the SDGs adoption to do this. So in this time, we shall also build this business case to help governments to move to green economy. And certainly, when governments enact policies, the private sector, including the banking sector, will have to be in the same realm.
Great. Okay, great. Well, thank you very much. We're not going to end the session yet. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask David if you could come up. I think this paints a very interesting sort of the challenges and the opportunities in terms of as individual institutions. We're doing interesting, exciting things today, and the question is we need to do things tomorrow. We need other actors to do things. And one of the challenges we have is exactly what is this trajectory? And I'd like to lead up, David has been our co-chair along with Denise for a number of years, and unfortunately had to step down this past summer at the end of his second term in that position. However, he hasn't been able to get that far away from us because we've been able to thankfully involve him in some very important work, including the conception of carrying out of this Global Roundtable. But also, we were audited recently, and we were challenged in one way, in a way we couldn't really answer, and it got us to sort of thinking. It's about this aspect of, are we able to actually understand and map our members in the finance industry as a whole, whether it is actually getting more sustainable over time? So with that, maybe, David, could you introduce a little bit?
Look, I think the discussion you've been having, and it's the big question, it's about what's the future for sustainable finance, because I mean, I am in little doubt that there is a momentum behind what we're doing. Bank Ito from 9% to 20%. IFC, 2/3 of development banks working on this. Munich Re integrating environmental risk. But the big question is, where are we going, and is it enough? There was one of the breakout sessions, I don't know whether you were there, Sean Kidney was presenting at it. He's leads the Climate Bond Initiative. And he said, climate bonds have been doing absolutely brilliantly for 5 years. We've gone from 3 billion to 80 billion issuance from 5 years ago to today. And he slammed his paper down and he said, it's absolutely not good enough. It's still marginal in terms of the way that the finance industry is operating. And that, I think, is the challenge. Are we doing enough? And do we know where it is that we're going? And as Eric said, we had this audit. I didn't know, as chair, that you had audits. And I thought in having an audit, all those emotions that you have when somebody says, I'm about to come and audit an operation of which you're particularly proud. And I remember we sat down. Actually, it was in a side room to a conference, a PRI conference, if I remember correctly, and said, well, how do you know if you've done a good job or not? And it was just before Paris, and I said, well, we've got 25 trillion people to sign up that we want a strong deal in Paris. Green bonds have been growing at 90% a year. We've got more shareholder resolutions. We've got portfolio decarbonisation. Even in things that people don't even know about, the property working group, 7,000 downloads that we've had of the work that they've been doing. And they said, oh, yeah, well, that all sounds quite good, but that's interesting. But how do you know? You're a partnership at the UNEP FI. How do you know whether or not your institutions are doing a good job or not? And I said, well, of course, it's very difficult to know what the information you'd need in. We've got SASB working on this, and IRC, and Bloomberg, and GRI. And they said, well, that's all very well, and that'll give you some measures, but this is taking a bit of time. Can't you tell the difference between people doing this well and people doing it not so well? If this is such a fundamental change that you're trying to bring about, changing finance to finance change, how do you know that you're getting to a new normal? And actually we had about 2 or 3 meetings, and I was defensive. Eric, as you know, is much more diplomatic than I am, but it did seem to me that they were asking us a good question. It was a good challenge. And I think that perhaps we do know what the institution of the future might look like. It's going to be different in its governance. It's going to be different in its management. It's going to be different in the assets that it holds or it manages. It's going to be different in the liabilities or the services that it operates. And it's going to have a different relationship with its supply chain and with regulators. And although I don't think we can have auditors come in and find numbers for all of this, I suspect that we ourselves are able to evaluate our organizations. By the way, if we could evaluate our organizations, that would be great, because we'd be able to share best practice better, and we'd be able to perform better. Let me give you an example. Look, we will be doing a long session on this tomorrow morning as a consultation for people who are UNEP FI members. Anyone who's about to become a member of UNEP FI, please do come along as well, actually, if this is anything of an advertisement. But look, I'll give you an example. I think that if I had gone to a financial institution 20 years ago and said, tell me about your operations, they would have said, I always operate within the law. By the way, I have a really strong sense of ethics in the way that I behave towards the outside world. And of course, environmental sustainability is one of those issues that floats out there, but I have no specific responsibility for it. I think today you would have a very different reply. I think people would say, the good ones in particular, that we're aware of the environment. We're aware of it as a risk. We're aware of it as a responsibility. And we manage it. The best, I think, would say we understand this systematically. And they would both say, and we can report on this and tell outsiders what we're doing and take the criticism. That's where the good might be today. But that, I don't think, is what a financial institution looks like on a sustainable planet. I think on a sustainable planet, the board would be able to tell me that all its activities were compatible with sustainability, and that indeed a number of the things that it was doing were specifically promoting sustainability. That was an issue that had been discussed and approved by the board, integrated into the strategy with somebody who was responsible for its delivery, and that it was reported objectively and in a comparable way, not just to shareholders, but to stakeholders. And I suspect that if you looked at the management of that institution, not just its governance, but its deep management, at its assets and liabilities, its supply chains, its relations with regulators, that those two are things that we could get better and we could evaluate. And so that's what we will be trying to do. Eric will be leading this. Over the coming year or two, it is simply a consultation, but it's trying to get a handle on, is the finance industry doing what it is that it ought to be doing? And I think it's the answer to this question, and it has come back. It wasn't just Sean, it's been in many of our discussions, Eric. But one was a question from Nick Robbins to Christian Thiemann. And he'd said, we shouldn't be applauding ourselves so much, should we, for what it is that we've done? And Christian replied, yeah, we should be applauding ourselves for what we should have done, but we should be absolutely clear that there is a long way still to go. And we need not to get lost. We need not to be talking platitudes to each other. And we need not to lose sight of the purpose of finance. And I hope that perhaps this exercise in evaluation is one that can take forward in a systemic way the things that you've been talking about at this session. Eric.
Great. Okay, thank you very much, David. And I think, and Richard, Najib, Denis, Bernd, and Pierre, and Bernd, I think this is kind of mapping as leaders who are moving forward. I think we also can engage this challenge about how do we exactly map. We kind of, it's kind of like on the quarterly results. It's the next thing, it's the next thing. And I think many do have strategies in place, or at least the more advanced ones do, knowing where we want to get to 2020. I think what we're very interested in discussing and furthering with yourselves and others in the room is, can we start to get a little bit more, can we start to get quantitative and qualitatively an assessment of whether the institutions we're working on today and where we're going to be in 5 years, is it going to add up to solving the larger sustainability problems we're talking about? Or in the end of the day, as we talk about green bonds, it's 1% today, it'll be 2 or 3%, but the question is, when are all bonds green? When are, the classic type of challenges we can talk about, but how do we start to get the frameworks to understand whether we have the roadmap to get the industry fit for purpose to financing sustainable development? So with that, I'd like to thank you very much. Thank you to an audience towards the